Have you ever wondered if it's possible to live in sync with your cycle? Do you struggle with a negative mindset around your period? Are you wondering if it's possible to be feminist and anti-birth control? We're going to explore these questions and so much more in the Managing Your Fertility podcast, because this is about helping you live a whole and full life. I'm your host and guide, Bridget Busacker, joining you in this journey of exploration related to women's healthcare, feminism, and fertility awareness. Are you ready? Let's get started. Hi, Mikayla. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So for our listeners who are just tuning in, Mikayla Dalton is a femtech geek, fertility awareness-based method educator since 2011 and childbirth educator since 2019. Her husband once told her that she looks like the Boar Queen with all her charting wearables on, and she said resistance is futile. She's an Australian cradle-turned-revert Catholic and a lay Dominican living in the United States. Mikayla, I'm so excited to have you on and talking more specifically about the particular method that you're teaching, the Boston Crosstrek method. So before we jump into the method and its specifics, can you tell us a bit about your story and how you became passionate about women's health?
Well, I wasn't always passionate about women's health until I encountered my own struggles with women's health. So that started early in my marriage when we'd gotten married in a cloud of romance and conceived about a month after we got married and had my first baby. And it was a really trying pregnancy. It was not a good birth. It was not a good introduction to motherhood. And then we thought, well, we need to avoid doing that again anytime soon. So in this recovery period, I decided that we needed to learn natural family planning. So I kind of fell into it out of need, not knowing anything about it. And I didn't have a very good first experience. And that kind of fired me up to want to help other women avoid the kind of terrible experience I had to begin with. And so that fired me up on the fertility charting side of things. And then the childbirth education was a similar story, that I had had some disappointing or experiences and some unethical behavior from my care providers. And then I thought, oh, wow, I wish I'd known more at the time so I would know what to avoid or what to advocate, how to advocate for myself. And boom, there was the childbirth education came into being.
That's really amazing, and really from your own story and your own experiences. I think this is true for a lot of people, how they come into women's health, or like you said, fall into the space of fertility awareness and natural family planning. So what led you to decide to become an instructor? Because I mean, I think it's one thing, you go through an experience and you fall into learning about your body and seeing, just the power of the data that you can use to make decisions around family planning and for your health and just, other needs that you might have. But then to become an instructor, I mean, that's like the next level up.
Yeah, I tend to do that kind of a thing where I'm like, something isn't right. I will fix it, and I will. Oh, so it was the church. For me, it was the church. So these kind of threads of self-knowledge and empowerment and stuff are all bound up for me with my faith as well. And so we were using fertility awareness because that's what the church permits. So we were like, we are Catholic and we will do what the church says. So we are going to do this fertility awareness. And initially our experience was disappointing. We had lots and lots of abstinence, like many long days of abstinence. And then when things finally seemed to be easing up on the abstinence front, we had an unexpected pregnancy at 9 months postpartum. And I was shocked, and I had a pregnancy evaluation done, and it was not a user error. It was just a method failure, or as they said, a method-related pregnancy. And we thought, okay, well, we'll need to try again. I was feeling pretty dispirited, facing another difficult pregnancy and so forth. And then the next time around, we decided to switch methods. So I discovered that there were more than one method. I thought NFP was one thing. But it turns out that the methods do differ from each other. And I'm like, well, that method didn't really suit my body. And come to think of it, it didn't really suit my personality either. So we switched methods and then had another not user error pregnancy at 4 months postpartum. And I cried. I cried so much. And I'd already signed up to do instructor training with my archdiocese, thinking, I'm going to help people. And I called up the coordinator and said, I don't think I should become an instructor because now I have 2 surprise babies and people are not going to take me seriously.
Mm.
And she, the lovely woman, talked me down and said, no, look, you're going to be a great instructor. Like, you understand the material, you can convey the material, you have great empathy. This will help you have more empathy for others that you're teaching down the line. Method failures are a fact of life. You're going to have to deal with it when it happens to somebody that you might be teaching. The fact that it's happened to you doesn't make you a lesser instructor. And so I recognized the wisdom of her words, and I continued training with the diocese to do this Crosstrek approach using the hormonal monitoring, because that even with a surprise pregnancy, that was still a better fit for my personality than relying on a single biological biomarker that was trickier. So yeah, I got there, and my method, having switched the third time to Boston Crosstrek, that has panned out quite well. So I finally hit the right point for me, but it took a little while to get there.
I just so appreciate your honesty and just the journey that you had in trying different methods and having experiences where the method, like you said, the method failure related pregnancy. And I think sometimes when individuals hear that, they're thinking, it can sound very, mechanical, data focused, but it's just the reality of what can happen, like you said, with the practice of NFP and the challenges that come with that. I mean, the emotions that come with that as well, that you're able to really be in this space to walk with women and couples who are struggling and trying to understand, okay, how do I do this? How do I make sure this is a good fit for me or not? What happens when it doesn't work? And how do I navigate those emotions that come with it? And just the reality that this isn't what we were expecting. This isn't what we were planning on. And I think that's that hard integration where we're recognizing, okay, this is a science that can be applied, but there's also that spiritual reality, that emotional reality to this practice, in saying, okay, if I really trust, God in practicing this, and if I'm really saying, okay, I'm open to life, what does that really mean? And that it doesn't mean that, your emotions always have to be joyful and happy all the time, that it's okay to experience those spaces of sometimes intense grief and
Right.
intense fear. And that's a hard space to be in, and it's okay to say that it's hard. I think sometimes we really try to fluff it up in the NFP space and not talk about it because we don't want to scare people away.
Right. And it's scary when it's for real. So I'm very data driven myself. I like looking at the numbers, but sometimes they can seem really abstract. So if you say, well, a method is 99% effective, well, that's 1 out of 100 in the course of a year. So you have 100 couples, and you'll have one couple that, even though they did everything correctly, have a surprise baby on the way.
Mm-hmm.
If it's 99.5%, well, that's 5 out of 1,000. And it seems really like, well, that's not going to happen. It happens to 5 out of 1,000, so it seems very distant and very abstract unless you happen to be that person. So, the odds were very good for the success, but there are small odds for failure, and it's important to realize that happens actually with everything.
Yes.
Yeah, actually everything. I have even read case studies of women who had conceived after they had a partial hysterectomy. So they still had their ovaries, they still had a cervix, and they still conceived. Um, yeah. So strange things can happen. I mean,
Yeah, I think it's that recognition there's always risk when it comes to medicine, when it comes to science, and that's not a bad thing. It's continual discovery, it's continually learning and remembering that it's not perfect. It's not, it's as much as we're striving to really understand how something works, it doesn't mean, researchers and instructors, and especially in this space, and medical professionals are being flippant. It's just recognizing that there's human error that's at play. There's just the circumstances of being human that come into play as we're applying this, as we're learning it, and that it's not going to be a perfect experience. And I think that can be somewhat terrifying to someone, especially when you're in that space and you're thinking, okay, well, I really need this to work. And it's not to say that it doesn't work, but it's that recognition that, okay, we're human beings practicing and applying this science. And if we're not perfect in other things, we can't expect to necessarily be perfect in this, but we'll do our best. And that's why I think, just the value of having an instructor is so important, because you have someone else who is, like for you, you really understood the material. And then on top of that, you had personal experience to really walk with couples and to continue to walk with them. And just the value of having an instructor to be able to speak into these areas and to say, okay, if this isn't making sense for a user, how can I help you? What are you not seeing? What isn't making sense? How do we explain this a little differently? And I think that's just so important. So with, the Boston Crosstrek method, can you tell us more specifically about this particular method that you're teaching, and getting a little bit more into the history and what type of method is it? Just the logistics. So as someone listening, they're thinking, okay, I think this could be for me. What does that look like?
well, I was probably just a preschool or a toddler when it was developed. I think it would have been the late 1970s, maybe 1979, maybe popping into 1980, but I think it was 79. And it was the first diocesan provided natural family planning method in the USA. So that's pretty cool. Like, it was a trailblazer back in the day. And so it was coming out of the Catholic Church, specifically from like a diocesan or archdiocesan perspective. And it started out as a symptothermal method. Back then, all of the instructors learned to teach basal body temping and cervical fluid. And their training for cervical fluid actually came through the Billings ovulation method of the time. And so Billings fluid and temping were put together into a symptothermal method. And then in 2009, it adopted the use of hormonal monitoring, at-home hormonal monitoring, where you pee in a cup and you test your urine for a couple of fertility hormones. And then you could use that with cervical fluid, or with temps, or with both. So it's become, I think technically you could call it a symptothermal hormonal method, but no one's going to say that. So I'm going to just call it one of the monitor methods, because it incorporates that hormonal monitoring. But like more colloquially, I might call it the buffet method, because you can pick and choose from which tools you want to use.
Which is really awesome, I think, for someone who's thinking, okay, I'm not really sure what maybe would be the most beneficial for me. And so to be able to tailor like that, I think is so helpful. And then again, of course, you have an instructor to work with, so that it's just that added benefit as you figure out, okay, what's going to make the most sense. So you started to answer how it works, but can you get a little bit more into the specifics? What would it look like from a day-to-day perspective in charting, if you were to use this method?
Well, it can vary quite a lot. So we do emphasize a cross-check, but it is possible to just use one sign if you wish. So we have rules for just doing temping alone if you need to, or just using the monitor by itself if you need to. We even have rules for just using cervical fluid by itself. That's more intended for a stopgap measure, though, if one of your other tools for some reason can't work out that cycle. But generally speaking, if somebody wanted to do cervical fluid alone, like long term, we would direct them to one of the mucus only methods, like the Creighton model or Billings or Family of the Americas or something like that, FEM perhaps. So for a typical person, so one of my sort of average clients, I guess, they might choose to do, say, monitor and temping. Those are nicely complementary because the monitor will tell you when you're having an ovulation attempt, and temping will confirm it after the fact. Or if by chance the monitor misses peak in one cycle, which it can do every so often, it occasionally can miss a peak, then you don't lose out the whole rest of the cycle because you'll see a thermal shift occur while you are getting a run of monitor highs. So for them, they would do something like, starting on cycle day 6 or 7 or 8 or 9, depending on the length of their cycles, they would pee in a cup in the morning when they wake up. And at some time during a 6-hour window of their choosing that day, they would test the pee by dipping a little test strip into the cup of urine and shoving it into the monitor and waiting for a result. Upon waking, they would have also taken their temperature, or they would have worn a wearable like temp drop overnight. So for that kind of average learner or client, they would know their fertility status at the start of the day. They will have temped, they will have tested their hormones in their urine, and they have other rules that might be in play about when fertility is supposed to start for that cycle. And so they would know at the start of the day if that day was an available day, if they're trying to avoid pregnancy, or if it was a day that they should abstain if they're trying to avoid pregnancy. So there's no waiting until the end of the day for those kind of clients. Some people might prefer to do cervical fluid and temps. And so for them, they would temp in the morning or wear their device overnight to take their temperature. And then they would wait until the end of the day to be able to ascertain what their cervical fluid observations were. And then at the end of the day, they would know their fertility status.
Okay, that's really helpful. And that's really great, just again, that flexibility and just saying, okay, depending on what makes the most sense for you, this is how you can really tailor how you're, taking these different aspects of your health and looking to see, okay, what makes the most sense for you. So what about effectiveness rates and what that looks like as far as research goes? You're mentioning a few different, with symptohormonal, symptothermal combination, as far as research goes for applying these methods.
Sure. I mean, that could get really complicated. So Boston Crosstrek is not affiliated with a large research institution. Running efficacy studies for fertility awareness-based methods takes a lot of money, like a surprising amount of money. And usually it'll be a research institution. And often they even those are applying for federal government grants to run these studies because they're so pricey. It's just one of the realities of research. So we don't conduct our own research because we're a relatively small method or not affiliated with any great big university. But we do rely on the published research that comes out from various research institutions. So our temping approach is reliant on research that has come out from like the old school research of Rutzer and Döring, up to the stuff coming out from Frank Herrmann in Germany. So we look at that research and we apply the principles to our method. So for our method of symptothermal, it should fit into the symptothermal range of efficacy, which is approximately 99+%. For a symptohormonal approach or a hormonal approach, it should fall within the range that comes with the monitor method approach as published through the Marquette University, which is what we're basing a lot of this on. And that range is between 98 and 100. So I know that seems kind of vague, but unfortunately, this is the case for many methods where people are putting together pieces from different research to form what they aim to have as a simple and usable method.
Yeah, right. And I think, just like what we were talking about before hitting record too, This is a whole topic for a podcast episode in and of itself, which is funding and research grants and being able to conduct research. I think it's easy to say, oh yeah, let's just do some research for that, or oh, there should be research for that. But the amount of work and money involved to be able to do that is quite a bit. And so it's, of course, yes, I think, we can both agree that yes, we would like to see more research in this space and we need it, to recognize, to get the funding that you need for that and to receive the grants takes quite a bit of work and time, and just that effort behind the scenes to really make your case, especially if you're looking to receive a grant for studying this and being in this space to expand the work. I know Dr. Marguerite Twain and her work and writing a lot of different research papers, it's hard, and it's hard to get accepted in different institutions, and depending on feelings around fertility awareness-based methods, there can be a lot of politics involved in that space too. So I think continuing to advocate for that and push for that is still very good, but I think for users to recognize a lot goes on behind the scenes to push that through and to get the appropriate research, because we do need it and it's important. So it gets to be a tricky space very quickly.
It does. And the thing is, I have a wish list of research that I'd like people to do. But the people who have been doing this, and Marguerite does amazing work with facts, and also Dr. Faring at Marquette and
Yes.
Dr. Stanford at Creighton, they are so dedicated. I have so much respect for them. They have done this work tirelessly, having to face opposition, not being taken seriously in the secular sphere. And they've done it from deep convictions about the goodness of what they're doing. And this is something that Humanae Vitae specifically called on academics and medical researchers to do, to make the methods better, make them more effective, make them more usable and available. And so they've been sent on a mission and they're following it. But it's such hard work, and they've dedicated their lives to it. And so even though I will always say, well, we need more research and we need to focus on this, and there will be something, we don't have enough research. Well, people have been working very, very hard on this for a long time. And it's been a very, if you don't mind me saying, unsexy area of academia to be in. It's not particularly prestigious. It's not amazingly well funded. And it's only recently now that the wider world is starting to jump on board fertility awareness-based methods and seeing some of the health benefits or self-knowledge and empowerment benefits and sort of green living in some cases. It's only now that it's starting to really gain traction, in a kind of wider sphere, that I'm hoping this will translate into better funding and recognition for the people who've been doing this good work for so long.
Yeah, absolutely. It, like you said, I mean, just the tireless amount of work that goes into it, just from the individuals that you would list. And I know there's more, it's just, it's needs to keep growing. And so I hope if there's someone listening who is in this space that loves research or is currently, thinking that this is something that they want to do, that would be great. Keep doing it. Keep fighting for more research and, seeing what this could look like to implement better studies, increased exposure. It's just so valuable. It's such valuable information, and it's not just something that's meant for a small group of women who happen upon fertility awareness-based methods. It's really meant for every woman to have this information available to her to make the informed decision that makes the most sense. And more often than not, women opt for fertility awareness-based method because they recognize this is such a more holistic approach to their health and understanding how their body works and how empowering it is to do that. So getting back a little bit more on track with the specifics of the Boston Crosstrek method, how does it work for postpartum? I think that's one of the biggest questions I tend to get through social media and just in emails. How do these methods work postpartum, and how effective are they? What about breastfeeding protocols? So what does that look like for this particular method?
This is really close to my heart because I've charted through 3 postpartum times myself. And I'm actually an early fertility return person. So my body thinks it's ready for another baby, like 2, 3, 4 months postpartum, even though I'm not really. But my body is an ovulation machine, apparently. So like just nothing puts it off, like just, and this is really close to my heart. For a while, I specialized, I took on almost only postpartum breastfeeding women. And so the way Boston Crosstrek works is, for this time, we particularly recommend the use of hormonal monitoring, specifically the Clear Blue fertility monitor. There are some other options, but that's the one that has a good amount of research behind its use for avoiding pregnancy and specifically for postpartum. Um, and it's quite flexible an approach, which is what you need. So you're in a time between having your baby and getting your first real period. That can be a short amount of time. So someone might be returning to fertility at 2 months postpartum, and other people don't return to fertility for 2 years. And in that time, they might have various breakthrough or withdrawal bleedings. They might have patches of potential fertility when their body seems to be ramping up for ovulation, but then doesn't, changes its mind, goes back. So you need a flexible approach. With Boston Crosstrek, what you would be doing in using a monitor is testing on a regular basis. And the basic rule, very, very basically, to strip it to its essence, is if you test and that day you get a low fertility result, that day is available. We have options for testing every other day if you don't want to necessarily have every day be potentially available and you want to save your money on the test sticks, and you think an every other day is sufficient. We have the availability for a flexible resetting schedule, so you're testing in batches of a set number of batches, but you can flexibly reset a little earlier or later depending on what results you're getting. You can, if you want to be more careful, you can bring in cervical fluid to assist, so that you would want both the monitor and your cervical fluid to indicate a low fertility day before you trust it. That would mean that you don't get the daytime available. So there's always a cost. There's always a cost benefit analysis when you're being more careful. So it can make perfect use effectiveness better, but it will usually come as a cost, and that cost will be either more actual money, or more effort, or more abstinence. But that's part of the beauty of the method, where I can say, look, how careful do you feel the need to be? Like, knowing that this might require more abstinence, or this requires significantly more effort. Are you the kind of person, if you have too much going on, you're just going to fudge it? So in that case, it would be better to keep it simple so you can do it. So yeah, again, Boston Crosstrek is a buffet kind of method. And so in this approach, you get to choose, like, among your buffet options. You're like, do we want to do the monitor alone and just know from the start of the day? Do we want more conservative options?
That's
Yeah, but
awesome.
really well. Yeah, it's nice to take people through postpartum, because very often what happens is they start out anxious, and then gradually gain confidence, and then they return to cycles, and we get them through those cycles, and then we get them, because the first few ones can be kind of wacky. They're difficult sometimes to get through, and then they're in regular cycles, and after a while they come to me and say, Mikayla, I think we'd like to conceive, and I'm like, wow, we did it. Like, we got you through the amount of time you needed, and that always makes me happy. So
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's really awesome too. Just to have, for you, just to see like, okay, this is awesome. Like, we're doing it, we're doing it, and then for the couple too, to just feel, I think that they can not only trust the method, but it's really trusting themselves and really, allowing themselves to go on this journey as a couple, and learning the woman's body and her cycle, and recognizing, okay, what does this really look like, on a day-to-day basis. I think just that reality that it is possible. That's just such a huge win emotionally and, beyond, which is great. So how are instructors trained for Boston Crosstrek method? What does that look like? I just think you've spoken so beautifully about how you walk with different couples, just in so many different arenas. And so on a practical level, what does the training look like to become an instructor?
I think it's really good. So I can't compare it to other methods because I haven't been trained in other methods. And I know each method has its own approach and requirements. So BCC used to be training in person only, which is why it was so regionally centered. This year, we're starting something different. So training is beginning in the fall of this year online. And we have applicants from all over the country and one in the UK. So that's been a change that we're instituting. It's broken up into multiple sessions. I think there are 7 sessions. Don't quote me on that. I forget the exact number. I think it is 7. And we cover topics like, here is biology. So here are the reproductive systems, here are the hormones, here's the science. We have a textbook that we require that they read certain chapters of to have a good scientific understanding of what's going on. It's a text that's actually used in the UK for the NHS to train fertility awareness-based method instructors. So we go through the science, and then we also go through Catholic teaching. Everybody learns about this, even if as an instructor, they're not Catholic themselves and they're not planning on teaching through a diocese. Everybody gets this because so many fertility awareness-based method users are coming from a Catholic background, and any instructor needs to be able to understand and respect what's going on there. Any instructor should be able to work with any person. But we do cover Catholic teaching on matters of like marital sexuality as it pertains to NFP and things like that. We cover all of the major signs that we use. So the monitor, the cervical fluid, basal body temping. We train them in the use of the temp drop. So we formally support the temp drop as a wearable option. The use of LH tests as a supplementary option, or a different kind of tool that somebody could use. And in the PROVE tests, those are the PDG or progesterone tests that you can do at home, and also in cervix changes, which are an optional extra in Boston Crosstrek as well. So they get training in all of the tools that we support. They do lots of practice charts. We do training in what makes a good educator, standards and communication and ethics and record keeping. And once they've done all the academic stuff and lots of assignments and readings and practice charts and things like that, then they move on to what we call the practicum, the supervised practical experience, where they will teach at least 2 postpartum clients and at least 2 regular cycle clients. And they have an existing instructor, sit in on their sessions for that whole time, just to make sure that they're teaching it appropriately and they don't get stuck somewhere because they're new. You know, you might make mistakes or get a question that flummoxes you, or a tricky situation. And so they go through the practicum, and at the end of that, if successfully completed, they're certified.
That's awesome. I love hearing all the different ways in which, an instructor is really going through the ropes and learning and really getting in the weeds, honestly, of the material and understanding, how does this really work, and ensuring that they have a strong understanding as they're working with couples, which I mean, of course, other methods have this too, but I think it's just really helpful to hear that process for users to understand that this isn't something that somebody does, a couple sessions like online or through YouTube. I mean, this is a very intensive process to be able to walk with you. And I think it just shows the value of an instructor to recognize, wow, they're really formally trained in this method, and what we're talking about, the Boston Crosstrek method, and that I think it should be so reassuring, really. I mean, I know that is the case for me personally, just like, okay, this individual knows what they're doing. Like, this is someone who has gone through a pretty intensive experience in training so that they're ready to work with me and to really be able to answer my questions.
Right.
Do you know, does insurance cover the use of this method, or does that, have you heard of that happening, or if there are different opportunities for those who may be saying, okay, I wonder how much this costs. What does this look like? I think that's also another topic that I really want to dive more into as well, just as a caveat, because I think a lot of times when we hear NFP, we think it should be free. And you just went through the process of explaining all of the training that someone goes through and just the work that they have to do. And so in the same way, you really, would you go to a surgeon for free or would you rather pay for someone? I think we have to really challenge the way in which we think about healthcare and spending. And obviously there are real constraints. So I don't want to ignore that with finances. But I think we sometimes forget that, it does matter to pay for expertise and there's value in that. And that's, I know, a larger conversation for individuals, but I think something that we need to be challenged in as users and recognizing, no, this really isn't something that should be free unless it's absolutely needed for someone in a situation where that's the only way that they'd be able to practice it. Obviously, we don't have monetary constraints for individuals.
Right. Yeah. It's funny. I've been on both sides of this. So when we started early in our marriage, we were poor. Like we were well under the poverty line. We were so poor that we were lining up for free food from one of those like food um, they get discarded produce from the supermarkets, that kind of thing. I was lining up, and then I was like sorting out, like at home, sorting out the moldy strawberries and the off potatoes and processing the rest. And we wouldn't have been able to afford a significant amount. So even though the experience with our first method turned out to be so difficult and ultimately unsuccessful, on the positive side, the instructor of that method had a wonderful normal day job, and she was doing this instruction out of a sense of Catholic mission and charity. And so all she asked for was a donation to put towards the cost of training somebody else in the area to also be an instructor. Because instructor training can be expensive for the people undergoing it. And so she was fundraising for this other person. And so that allowed us to show up and just like hand over like $20, which was a stretch for us at the time. So I've been on that side of need, and I've also been on the other side of instructing where, I paid and I had helped to pay. So my local parish paid a portion of my learning fees to become an instructor. And then I was doing so much work with so many postpartum women, and that can be really intensive and it can go on for a long time. I was often working with people for 2 years, like on average. And my husband turned to me one time, and, I was constantly, I didn't like to say no to people because they need help. So I was constantly like getting messages on my phone or a Facebook message or an email message. And so in all of my free moments, I was constantly like responding to people with fertility questions. And he said, you realize with the amount of time you spend on your clients, like meeting them formally, but also answering questions every single day, even Christmas, even our wedding anniversary, and the amount of time you spend just in continuing education for yourself to stay on top of research and biology and things like that, you are making well under minimum wage. He was a little cranky on that particular day because it was like I was wearing myself really thin. So I've seen both sides where there's a genuine need to have this available at minimal or no cost for people who need it, but also that instructors' time and expertise is valuable. And that it's probably not sustainable to have an army of people providing free service and expect that to be good service. Ideally, like in my ideal world, we would have like a huge religious orders where a bunch of religious sisters and brothers like are trained just to teach fertility awareness-based methods, and that's their like mission. But aside from that, as a quick fix, it's going to be more difficult. I know that all of the BCC instructors, we have a set fee for different services, so there's no surprises. Everybody has the same fee, and it tends to be on the higher side of method fees. Is my sense of it, like maybe not as high as, for example, some instructors providing creatine, but there's variability there. So it tends to be on the higher side, but the quality of what we're providing, we're really trying to make it one-on-one. We're not doing group sessions with a whole bunch of people. The quality is really there. And I've got to say that even with the set fee, nobody can charge more than the set fee, but a lot of people, if they're faced with somebody in need, will do payment plans or provide education grants or do pro bono work, that kind of thing, because we are motivated by a helper sense. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's really great and really helpful, I think, for individuals to hear just the availability and range in which costs can look like. And I'm glad you're actually not giving numbers, because I think that just challenges individuals to look into each method and see what makes the most sense. And, depending on, an instructor that they work with the Boston Crosstrek method, that's really a one-on-one conversation to have. But I think it's one that does come up a lot. There isn't necessarily a set cost for each method, because instructors are trying to meet people where they're at. While there are, there can be set fees, like you noted. I think just recognizing this is an emphasis in, yes, working with individuals and paying a professional, but there's also that passion and heart element of really wanting to get this information out there. And that's a hard balance for instructors to try to live out, so that you're not finding you're constantly being burned out, working with individuals all the time, but you're also available to really help individuals too. So I think just for users to have that awareness.
Right.
They're going
Burning out is a real danger. So I almost went too far myself. Like, you can overextend. But also on the financial side, I should mention that if you are using a monitor method approach, that is going to have its own cost, just aside from instruction. So instruction is its cost, and that typically comes with every method, up to more or less a degree. But if you are using a monitor method, that comes with its own cost. You need to get those supplies. You need to purchase a monitor, or you need to purchase test sticks. So just bear that in mind. A lot of people say, well, using NFP is cheap. It's not, it doesn't always work out that way. So the monitor and sticks, if you have an FSA or HSA account, that's usually covered. I haven't had my instruction services covered except from various Catholic dioceses, which allow for NFP instruction coverage, so that you don't need to be a medical provider in a clinic doing it to qualify. So I've had my instruction costs covered a few times, but it's pretty unusual. For monitor and test sticks, I work with people to try to get them the best price and figure out if there are alternatives or different ways we can tweak things to cut down on those costs. My husband and I actually run a mission to send supplies to people in need. So most recently, it's been a couple of Catholic missionary couples in South America that we've sent monitors and test sticks to.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
cool. That's
Because
beautiful.
it can be hard. I have clients in Australia, and they don't even sell the test sticks there. So, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of work to be done here.
Right.
But we're doing it. I mean, I think it's just like, it's beautiful that you have a mission and sending things to individuals and just finding those opportunities to say, okay, how can we help? Like, I think it's just so beautiful in different individuals I talk to in this space, this desire to go just beyond, the transaction of saying, okay, instructor, client, instructor, user, whatever that relationship you want it to look like. I mean, there's this heart and passion involved in this space to truly desire better healthcare for women and better knowledge and resources available, so that women actually find themselves empowered by their bodies and understanding how their bodies work, and just the goodness that comes in this space amidst the hard and amidst the challenges. That this is a really good and beautiful pursuit in understanding our own health in such a holistic manner. So, okay, as we're wrapping up, final question here for you. How can someone work with an instructor and reach out if they're listening, we're coming to the end of this interview and they're thinking, man, this is the method for me. I really need to learn more. What's the best way to contact you or contact other individuals with Boston Crosstrek?
Well, I'll send you a couple of links. So Archdiocese of Boston includes contact details for all the people offering NFP services in that area. So that includes a number of BCC instructors as well as others that we have. I think we have a couple lead instructors and some Creighton model instructors and things like that. But we're included in there. So you can just go to the Archdiocesan NFP page for Boston Archdiocese, and you'll find BCC instructors there along with others in the area. Boston Crosstrek also has a website, bostoncrosstrek.com. Currently, I think there are only 4 or 5 instructors listed on that website. We do have more, but we're waiting for them to update their training with the new online training that we're having later this year. So it'll look like a few, but we actually have more in the wings and more getting trained. So there'll be a sudden influx late
That's awesome.
in the year. Yeah. So it'll look light now, but we'll have the returning instructors listed later this year and a bunch of new ones as well. So that's
Awesome.
probably the best way to start.
That's great. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Mikayla, for being on and just sharing more personally about your experience, your passion for women's health, and your work with Boston Crosstrek Method. So for those listening and wanting to learn more, this is a great way to reach out and learn more about this method or decide to, go for it and working with an instructor. But it's just been really helpful to have you break down the specifics of how this works and really getting into the details of it. So thank you so much for being with me today and with everyone listening.
You're very welcome, Bridget. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe, share with your friends, and help expand the conversation around women's health. If you'd like to learn more about fertility awareness, visit www.managingyourfertility.com for more information, resources, guides, and so much more.